Well, they won't join us. They're not going to leave their huge active church and be a part of this, but maybe they have friends that'll be interested. So we sat down with them, we shared with them about the vision God had given us. They listened politely and went on their way. But that next Sunday, they were at their home church, and the pastor was giving a sermon series on how the members of the church could be a part of building the kingdom of God and making disciples. And one of his points that morning was, look, if you want to make disciples, be part of starting a church. Starting new churches is the most effective means of evangelism. And our friends looked at each other and they said, well, our pastor's telling us to join and be part of a new church. I guess we're supposed to do this. Now, that pastor was Leith Anderson, our speaker this morning, and that church is Wooddale Church. And I don't have to worry that after this, Leith is going to rebuke me for stealing a couple people from his church, because he truly is a very kingdom-minded leader. And if there's anything that you should know about Leith, is that he is about building the kingdom of God, right? He is a Baptist who is telling Anglicans how to grow and how to improve their work. And that's what he's been about, as far as I can tell, all of his ministry. He's been at Wooddale Church for more than 30 years. As I mentioned, my wife grew up there and grew as a disciple through the ministry of that church. Her family's involved there, and I'm so thankful for Wooddale. They have also planted numerous churches. Leith can tell you how many that Wooddale has planted. They have daughter churches. They have granddaughter churches. They've helped plant churches of other denominations as part of their church planting work. Throughout the Twin Cities, they have these churches. They're called wood chips. They're all these churches that came out of Wooddale. And that name may suggest that they're sort of these tiny little churches out there, but they're big. Wooddale births big babies, and there are these Wooddale plants all over, and they're building the kingdom in the Twin Cities. Leith has been involved in that. He's also written numerous books about Christian ministry and Christian life. Leadership That Works is my personal favorite. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. He's the current president of the National Association of Evangelicals and gets a little attention in that role, but he is a wonderful leader in that, and I know people are thrilled that he agreed to come on as president there. He's also been involved in building up and supporting seminary education. He's been very involved at Bethel Seminary in the Twin Cities, as well as Denver Seminary. And then he also comes to groups like this, and he teaches and shares wisdom. If you were at the second annual winter conference, you may remember Leith's talks then, which were wonderful. And I'm sure if you were there, you're glad to have him back, as I am. Every time I hear Leith, I always find myself quoting him to numerous people afterwards. So get out your notebooks, get out your pens, be ready to take good notes, and let's welcome back to the Winter Conference, Leith Anderson.
I take you back 17 years to the 19th of May in 1991. That was the date when a veteran and famous Soviet cosmonaut named Sergei Krikalev was launched into orbit with what was intended to be a 4-month journey circumnavigating the Earth on a Soyuz 12 spacecraft. He was, at the time, arguably one of the most famous men in the Soviet Union. He was a member of the Communist Party, a strong supporter of Mikhail Gorbachev. He was a native of Leningrad, and he was extremely well paid at 200 rubles per month. He was launched into orbit, and then a very difficult thing happened while he was gone, and that is that his country went out of business. And that affected ground controllers and all of those that are involved in space travel. So his 4 months intended journey came and left, and he got an extension. So he's up there circumnavigating the globe 5 months, 6, 7, 8 months. The end of 1991 and into 1992, still spinning around the Earth. There are days when I think I have troubles, and I try to imagine myself in his spacecraft, and somehow my difficulties seem to be less. It took 311 days, 20 hours, and 1 minute of space travel before Sergei Krikalev was brought back to Earth again. When he came back, His country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, had been replaced by the new Russian Republic and the Commonwealth of Independent States. His hometown was no longer Leningrad, but St. Petersburg. Mikhail Gorbachev had been replaced by Boris Yeltsin, and 200 rubles was not quite enough money to buy one hamburger at the Moscow McDonald's. And I think that story is something of a metaphor for the changes that have occurred in this nation, in that nation, and around the globe at the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century. But our focus is not on space travel, it is on spiritual truth and transformation. We desire to be the Church of Jesus Christ, like the first century church, but in our century and in our generation, which is at the same time both difficult and exhilarating. And yet I can think of no churches better positioned to be first century churches in our 21st century than the churches of the Anglican mission. In trying to think through what it takes to fulfill the call of Jesus Christ as a movement of churches in our generation, I wrote down a list, and I wish that it were linear and alliterated, but it is not. Rather, it is simply a string of concepts that I believe speak to missional ministry in America at the beginning of the 21st century. First on my list is that we believe biblically, understanding that we are surrounded by competing truth claims. I suppose in a sense that could always be said of the world, but there is a spreading of ideologies through the internet and world travel that makes this competition perhaps more ferocious than it has ever been before. So to be truly biblical and truly Christian, we must subscribe to the historic Orthodox Christian faith. That is to say that we believe what is declared in the ancient creeds, that we believe that there is one God in three persons of Father, Son, and Spirit, that we are committed to the truth of the deity of Jesus Christ and his substitutionary atonement on the cross. And as J.I. Packer reminded us earlier today, that we are the people of the resurrection, that we live out not only the incarnation, but the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that we affirm that Jesus is the sole basis for our salvation. All this we believe because, in the words of the Apostle Jude, the faith that once for all was entrusted to the saints is our faith, our Orthodox Christian faith. However, it's more than just adhering to orthodoxy. It is, I'm convinced, enormously attractive to many in our 21st century America. And it's to be expected that this will be part of the life of our churches. So when you go to a restaurant, you're not offended that they serve food. And when you go to a concert, you're not surprised that they have music. That's what you would expect. And when you go to a church, you expect that God will be there. And you expect that the truth of God will be taught. And so that is the expectation, sometimes in some churches, sadly, not declared and therefore disappointing. So in a world swirling with a billion truth claims, we offer a fixed point unlike any other. And it is, in my opinion, no wonder that so many mainline denominations in America have downsized and up-aged because they have failed to hold on to this Orthodox biblical faith. Effectiveness for Jesus Christ is deeply rooted in believing biblically. But candidly, that's not the whole story. That's not enough. It's also about how we live, that we live in a way that glorifies God. The Westminster Shorter Catechism begins asking the question, what is the chief end of man? And the memorized response is, the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. I remember a point in my life after having grown up in a Christian home and gone to seminary and become an ordained minister, and was listening one day to myself pray. And in my own prayer, I referred to doing everything for the glory of God and how important the glory of God was. And when I concluded the prayer, I realized that if you asked me to define what that meant, I really could not. I really didn't have any workable understanding of what it truly meant to glorify God. And yet, it seems to me that that is at the epicenter of all that it means in terms of Christian life and behavior. So I did a little bit of research, concluding pretty quickly that the Greek word for glory or to glorify is the word doxa, from which we get the name of the Christian hymn, the doxology, and discovered that in its classical background that doxa referred to a person's reputation. So that sort of evolved into a definition of the glory of God being the reputation of God. Or another way of saying it is that to glorify God is to enhance God's reputation. It is to make God look good. It is not to improve upon God. God in his essence and in his attributes is perfect beyond any imagination or description that we could ever give to him. But the reality is that we live in a world where God's reputation is often tarnished, where people blame God for evil that they themselves have initiated. And so the truth and the reality of who God is and his reputation are often distant from one another. Therefore, when we glorify God, we enhance God's reputation. We make God look good. We bring the reputation of God into alignment with the reality of who he is. King David prayed in Psalm 86:12, I will praise you, O Lord my God, with all my heart. I will glorify your name forever. In other words, I will always live to enhance the reputation of God, to behave and live and believe in a way that makes God look good. So what does it look like to glorify God? On July 19 in AD 64, the city of Rome burned with a fury. It was a city of wooden tenements, and it was easy for the blaze to spread from one community to another until these tenements were destroyed and there were tens of thousands of people who were left homeless. After burning for about 3 days, it began to subside, and the firefighters of Rome built fire breaks around the core of the city so that it wouldn't spread out to the perimeter and to the suburbs. And the city of Rome in that first century took a collective sigh of relief that at last the fire had stopped. But then after only about a day, it started up again on the other side of the fire breaks. And it burned with a ferocity that was greater than the first.